and welcome to Spotlight. More than 4 months has passed since Israel started its onslaught against the people of the Gaza Strip. Nearly 28,000 Palestinians have lost their lives and about 70,000 others have been injured. Most of the population in the besieged territory have been forced to move to the southern city of Rafah. Now Israel is preparing to invade the Palestinians' last refuge in the Gaza Strip. The United Nations has warned of a bloodbath if Israel invades the city. Where else do the Palestinians have to go? And will there ever be an end to the decades-long Western-backed occupation and genocide against the Palestinian people? Joining us on tonight's Spotlight, we have former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, joining us from Raleigh, North Carolina. And also we have radio host and journalist at CPR News, Mr. Don DeBar, joining us from Ossining, New York. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. McGovern. After 126 days of Israeli barbarism and brutality, nearly 29,000 people have been killed in Gaza. Schools, mosques, churches, hospitals, and even ambulances have been frequent targets of the strikes, which have now left only a few of the medical facilities partially operational in Gaza. Please share with us your perspective on this tragedy that is unfolding in Gaza before our very eyes.
Well, the painful thing, of course, is that I'm an American citizen, and without the support of my government, Israel could not do these things. Not only is it arming and giving political support to Israel, but it's also denying the requisite funding for the only agency that can help, and that's UNRWA, the UN body that provides aid to the people in Gaza and has for many, many years. They have decided to withhold funding on the pretext that some, well, first they said 12, now it's down to 6 of the 26,000 employees of UNRWA in Gaza were cooperating or somehow involved with Hamas. They said that without providing any evidence, and our Secretary of State bought it, saying, you know, I think this is completely plausible, even though we don't have any confirmation. So what pains me is the fact that this could stop. We're trying to exert pressure on our government to stop enabling this. So far, we have not been successful.
Don DeBar, after over 4 months of lethal and deadly attacks, the resistance groups in Gaza are fighting back strong, both inside and outside of the Strip. Iran's foreign minister has recently highlighted that Israel has achieved none of its goals after 4 months of genocide in Gaza. So what have the Israelis achieved other than being record holders for murdering children?
Well, whatever political constituency existed in the world, in whatever pockets in the world, some large pockets in the United States and Western Europe, of support for Israel has pretty much evaporated. It is very difficult to explain what people have been witnessing now for the last 4 months in any terms other than mass murder or genocide or whatever. The people that don't want to get bogged down in the legal definition of genocide, does this rise to this or that level, look at the murder of thousands of civilians, including thousands of children, and understand that that's wrong no matter what it's called. We're sitting in the United States. It's really almost head-splitting confusing. There was a trial that concluded yesterday in the Midwestern part of the United States, I don't remember if it was Michigan or Ohio, of a woman whose 15-year-old son had taken a gun to school and killed 4 fellow students. She was convicted also of homicide, involuntary manslaughter, based on criminal negligence, basically, that this is her child did this, and so she's culpable, basically, for not educating him better, keeping better rein on him, and allowing him to have a gun. This case was being raised by people who in the United States who believe that guns kill people, not people kill people. And then we look at a place like Israel or Ukraine, where there are people that claim not to be the United States, either making war on Russia or committing genocide on the Palestinians. The U.S. claims that that's not them and they're not culpable for it. And the weapons sales, the United States has an $900 billion a year budget, basically producing things that murder people in large numbers. So it's difficult to parse which is which. Rifles that kids can use to shoot 10 of their friends, or bombs that blow up entire cities, in the course of a week or two. But we have people making money on both of them, by the way, and both will continue until we stop it.
Ray McGovern, the UN Chief Antonio Guterres says a ceasefire is needed before, quote, a gigantic tragedy develops in Rafah. Now, Israel, as we mentioned earlier, is bombing areas of Gaza it had initially designated as safe, with it wiping out entire families, and it's now planning a ground assault in Rafah. Is Israel using the excuse of eradicating Hamas, something that it has failed to achieve, to continue to kill Palestinians? A senior Hamas official says the Israeli Prime Minister's insistence on continuing the onslaught against Gaza shows his goal is genocide against Palestinians.
What the Israeli defense minister said very early on in the first week of their retaliation was that we're dealing with human animals here. We have to pretty much exterminate them, as many other Israeli leaders have said. Now, for genocide, you have to prove intent. And so it was no problem for the International Court of Justice to prove intent based on the pronouncements of the Israeli leaders themselves and these troops that followed their orders. So, it really needs to stop. And for the UN Secretary General to say, oh my, this will be a bloodbath that we never seen before in my time, that's not enough, okay? Now, what's enough? He has to lean on the United States and Great Britain, U.S. vassal, and get the president to stop what he's doing, President Biden, even in his old age, even though the Department of Justice here in the United States has called him feeble, memory deprived, and old. They did that yesterday. They should wake him up and say, look, we need you to stop this because it's the U.S. that needs to stop it. Meanwhile, I have to say that the Houthis, strangely enough, have a real partner in their struggle to stop the genocide. And who is that partner? It happens to be a UN body called the International Court of Justice. Wow. Where are the other Arab leaders? Where are the leaders of Turkey? Who they need to explicitly condemn all this and do more than condemn it in a gradual way. In other words, I'm not saying a major offensive or a major attack of any kind, but ape what Vladimir Putin is doing in Ukraine. Attrition, 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 until the Israelis are feeling so much economic damage from what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea that they'll realize that they have no future. They have no economic future unless they cease and desist.
Don DeBar, in his most recent comments, U.S. President Joe Biden said the Israelis have gone, quote unquote, over the top regarding the assault on Gaza. How far is too far in the support that Washington is offering for the Israelis and the massacre that they're committing? Iran's foreign minister just recently said the U.S. military, financial, and diplomatic support for Israel will have no result but defeat.
Well, actually, in his most recent remarks, President Biden appointed President al-Sisi as president of Mexico. That was, I think, his last public statement. Too far was passed within a day of October 7th, maybe October 8th. Too far really had been passed somewhere in 1947, 1948. The terrorist attacks that were made against the Palestinian people in the run-up to the creation of what they call the State of Israel. You have failures across the board by the U.S. Government and its actions, along with the Israelis. There's an ongoing set of violations of UN Security Council resolutions that are supposed to be setting the borders of Israel and Palestine at 1967. They've been ignored pretty much 50 years now by the Israelis. There have been various war crimes committed periodically by the Israelis and by extension by the United States. That's just in that conflict. Of course, the United States has been committing them all over the planet. The bombing recently of Yemen, of Syria, along with an illegal occupation, of Iraq, along with an illegal occupation that still continues even after it was officially discontinued several times now. This is in essence the standard operating procedure of the empire. I don't know how you put a stop to it using the architecture of imperialism that was constructed in the aftermath of World War II, but it has to be stopped by whatever means necessary. And we're getting close to the point where it has to be stopped now.
Ray McGovern, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian, in his recent trip to Beirut, said that Israel wants to drag the U.S. alongside itself into the West Asia quagmire. Do you believe the Israelis are seeking to expand their onslaught on Gaza into a wider regional conflict so they can get the U.S. directly involved? And are those actions producing the results that the Israelis are seeking?
Well, I have to tell you that I've been around for a while, and I know what quagmires are. I've been through Vietnam. I've been through Afghanistan. I've watched Iraq. I've watched Libya. The U.S. getting involved in quagmires? Of course. Israel and its neoconservative patriots there in the U.S. government would like nothing better than to get the U.S. involved overtly in a war against Iran. Now, that can only happen if Iran rises to the bait, so to speak, okay? Now, Iran, in my view, has played it very cautiously. It knows, as most educated observers know, that Israel is on its way out. This is never going to be the same for Israel. The problem is what to do for the next 2 weeks. What to do when the rest of those Gazans are exterminated, a word used by the Nazis when I was a little boy, exterminated in and around Rafah and South Gaza. What to do then? That's what my concern is, because I care about the children, and as Roger Waters puts it in his song, we have to ensure that no one kills the children anymore.
Don DeBar, Yemen has pledged to continue its operations against Israeli-linked vessels until the regime stops its war on Gaza, regardless of the attacks by the U.S.-led coalition in the Red Sea. The leader of Yemen's Ansar Allah movement says the U.S.-led aggression against his country will not protect Israeli-linked ships. Talk to us about the Yemeni response to the Gaza onslaught and this defiant message that the Yemenis are sending to the U.S. and its allies.
Well, to a large degree, first of all, it's returning fire that's been levied against Yemen and Gaza for years now. Yemen has been looking at a quarantine in JFK's terminology, a blockade, whatever, heavily sanctioned and traffic heavily controlled by external forces, as has Gaza since 2007. And they're returning fire now. They're basically saying, oh, really? Well, we're not allowing any traffic in to resupply you. Under the present conditions, the global opinion, world opinion, is with them. Certainly, the people on the ground. There's a situation that exists in the immediate area that I think is now, being replicated around the world. The sympathies of the people, forgetting the governments, but of the people throughout the Muslim and Arab worlds, have always been with the Palestinians, even if the policies of their governments were not. The governments had to at least pay lip service and maintain a respectful, quote unquote, distance from the Zionist state. And we're at a point now where the situation for the Palestinians is so desperate in front of all these other folks in the neighborhood that these governments have had to bend a little more, and or still some of them are looking down the barrel of a gun called revolution if they don't do something, if they just stand by and allow this to continue to happen. I think that's also developing around the world to a degree. And so Yemen suddenly getting involved like this, rather than looking like extreme or terrorism or whatever, looks appropriate to a lot of people. They're trying to stop a slaughter of a people. So I think that the Israelis and the U.S. or whoever's really making policy did a serious overreach this time, and I think that on the ground the whole game board basically is changing. That being the mindset of the people.
Ray McGovern, let's turn our attention to the resistance outfits in Iraq and Syria. What do you think are the motives behind the United States' recent attacks on those resistance groups in Iraq and Syria?
Very simple, to show how strong the United States is. We put these poor fellows in the line of fire as targets, and then when somebody shoots at them, we're real strong. We'll retaliate. One fact that needs to be mentioned in any discussion like this is that the Houthis and Iran are not alone here. As most people don't know, a treaty between Russia and Iran is in its very final stages, and also China is desperately interested in making sure that things don't blow up in the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea because they depend so heavily on Iranian oil. So what does that mean? That means that Iran is not alone. This is very different constellation of forces than just 2-3 decades ago. And the problem is that our president doesn't seem to be able to understand that, and his advisors don't seem to be able to tell him that, this is different. We have to stop supporting Israel 110%.
Don DeBar, Iraq has condemned the latest U.S. drone strike on the capital, Baghdad, calling it a breach of the country's sovereignty. An Iraqi resistance movement has called for submitting a request to the UN Security Council to demand the immediate withdrawal of foreign forces. The Iraqi prime minister has also stated that Baghdad wants a quick withdrawal of the destabilizing U.S. forces from Iraq. So we see the pressure keeps piling and piling on the United States, and a deadline has not been set, but still, at this point, it seems Iraqi politicians have this historic opportunity to expel the U.S. from Iraq. How close are we, in your opinion, to seeing that day?
That's the kind of thing that happens all of a sudden, apparently all of a sudden. It builds over, a long period of time, and then there's just some catalyzing event that triggers a series of events in rapid succession. I think we're looking at that now. I can't imagine a more catalyzing event than a genocide on television for 4 months. But this is an expression of the phenomenon that I was referring to before. The Iraqi government, whether to call them a comprador government or not, I don't know, but certainly they have existed, in the post-occupation period with at least the sufferance of the United States government, of the military, who are still, occupying pieces of Iraq, by the way, and still operational, obviously, because they've conducted operations, they're both on the ground inside and from outside into Iraq. The people in Iraq have had it. If everything that's happened since 1991 or whatever wasn't sufficient, finally, we're certainly there. And so whether the government wants to or not, they're going to have to pursue this line of antagonism and in essence, kicking the United States out, or the people will do it for them and send them along with the U.S. troops. I think that's pretty much on the agenda now in a lot of homes in Iraq.
Ray McGovern, in reaction to the ICJ's ruling, which you also alluded to earlier, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he called the order a disgrace and vowed to continue the onslaught. That, of course, was to be expected because the Israelis have been a rogue entity since day one. But does this expose the lack of a proper global mechanism to deal with such issues? The tribunals are powerless. The UN Security Council has been nothing but a spectator for 4 months as hundreds of innocent people are dying daily in Gaza. How can this status quo change, in your opinion? And in a case like this, how and where can accountability start to take shape?
I concede that the UN has its limits, but it's a hell of a lot better than the international rules-based system, which has no limit and which has no jurisdiction or validity. So what I would like to do is say, look, the UN was set up at a time when we did things sensibly. I applaud the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, now the Syrians, and now the Iraqis for using the UN and the UN Security Council, which does have some teeth, in their best effort to do the right thing. Now, in the process, the U.S. is completely isolated. When it votes, it has maybe two allies, Israel and an obscure set of islands in the Pacific Ocean that is forced to vote with the United States. So it's maybe 3 to hundreds. So this is going to work its way out. I don't rule out the UN. It's the only thing we have left. And as I say, several of the nations seem to realize that. And we need to give them a chance. The problem, of course, is what happens in the next 2 weeks, the next 2 days to those poor people in Gaza.
Don DeBar, do you agree with Mr. Govern regarding the UN?
Yeah, look, the UN is not the answer to these problems, but, in terms of ignoring it or walking away from it, that was tried at the very beginning of its life, at the beginning of what we call the Korean War here. The Soviet Union, rather than vetoing the War Powers Resolution or whatever the analog name is for that, walked out to boycott it, and so there was a UN force sent in on the side of the U.S. Anywhere where people are sitting down talking, and particularly in a public forum, to vet these issues is a good thing. It's more than what we have, and so I wouldn't sit around and wait for it to work, but I wouldn't walk away from it either. It's got to be a part of the whole effort.
One last question, Mr. DeBar, while we're with you. In spite of all the efforts to weaken the resistance in the region and efforts by Israel and co. to demonize it, why do you think that the resistance front is still thriving?
Well, the more you oppress people, the more incentive they have to rise up. You actually force their hand. In the Star Wars movie, the Princess Leia, whatever, the tighter you squeeze, the more worlds will, slip through your fingers. That's how it works. We're human beings. We don't like to have somebody make us do stuff we don't want to do. We don't like to watch people kill our families. We don't like to starve when it's not necessary. We won't tolerate it at some point, and we're getting to that point around the world with this empire. This is one of the hot points where that's happening.
Mr. McGovern, same question to you.
When Osama bin Laden and his lieutenant, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, let's take Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was asked why he was the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, he said, it was because of my deep hatred for U.S. policy favoring Israel against the rights of the other peoples. People have to take that seriously. That was buried in page 148 of the 9/11 report in one sentence. But if you're asking why people do these things, they get to a point where they seek vengeance for the clear affronts to their human nature that they have suffered. It's inevitable, and nobody's pointing that out, that the more we do this stuff out there in the Southwest Asia, so-called now, the more likely it is that we'll have another 9/11 or something like it.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen. Former CIA analyst Ray McGovern from Raleigh, North Carolina, and also thanks to Don DeBar, radio host and journalist, CPR News, joining us from Austin, New York. And a special thanks to our viewers for staying with us on tonight's Spotlight. It's good night for now, and see you next time.